let's start from the beginning again.
Okay.
Tell us why you decided to become a physician.
Well, it was an easy decision, really. There were 3 physicians in the family, and I liked that kind of life. I found it appealing in many ways, and although there was no pressure for me to follow that route, because my father, grandfather, and uncle were all doctors, I guess I always thought that's what I would be. And so, yeah, it proved to be relatively easy. In the modern era, many people go through year after year of unsuccessful applications, so I didn't do that. Maybe I applied to easier schools, but anyway, I got in some schools right away, which gave me confidence about the others, and so yeah, it was relatively easy and fun. And my name. It was the time of affirmative action, and my name was so exotic looking, even though I wasn't. I looked like the most conventional, like Caucasian male, nothing special. But my name was really exotic, and so they thought maybe they could get part credit for having somebody with such an exotic name. So anyway, yeah. So every now and then that also entered in, and I've enjoyed medicine thoroughly the whole time, and there really are no downsides. It's not like I ever thought I should have done something different. Really isn't the situation. So.
And do you think that your interest in history is partly related to the fact that your family is a family of physicians?
Well, that's part of it. But the other thing is we have strong genes for history and culture. It kind of skipped a generation with me a bit, in that my father and my middle son, Kevin, are both more interested in history and culture and classics. They're even interested in the same classics, Greek and Roman and stuff. So there was a lot of that. And although I probably resisted it, my father did talk a lot about such things. He was quite interested in history and how human culture got to be the way it is now, and so on. So it was for, as you say, family reasons, maybe a kind of natural thing for me to go into it. It was what other people in the family had also been interested in. My grandmother Betty, she was the wife of the only doctor in town in Bradford, Vermont. And she did a lot of entertaining, which was remarkable in 2 ways. First of all, her bookshelves were very impressive, but they mainly contained books that she had never read, but she got a lot of praise for what the books were anyway. So there was a certain value of just buying a book that you never read that people thought was really cool to have. And then there was the easy chair for my grandfather, the town doctor. And he would fall asleep in the middle of his own party, and the whole town accepted this. They needed a well-rested doctor in case any of them got sick. So the fact that he regularly fell asleep in the middle of his own parties, they had the best parties, and his being asleep didn't detract from them one bit. So in medical school, one of the things that made medical school fun, I think, is that I developed a skill I hadn't had before of sleeping at will. And this is really my only remarkable trait, I think. You know, people think maybe there's some others, but I think this is really it, that I can sleep whenever I want and wake up at an appropriate time. That's even more important because, of course, it's a killer if, like, you're in a room and everybody else leaves the room and you're there snoring away. So that can't happen. You have to be able, in this sleeping at will, to be able to sense the room and when it's time to wake up and leave to do that. So I've also been able to do that. And my grandfather very much had that skill. So, you know, the whole town depended upon his ability to be ready to serve them as the only physician. And yeah, so...
break, okay. Okay, I think it's now. How is it? Wait. Well, let's go on the other one.
Okay.
Up. And so, why do you think history is so important for a physician?
Well, one needs to have a sense of one's place in the world, and you know, whether medicine is something so deeply ingrained in society over so many centuries that, you know, you can feel really proud about that, or if you're totally dependent upon what medicine is in 2019 and, you know, nothing else matters. And that sense of history is also important in the sense that Leslie Cormack, the Dean of Arts at our university, gave a talk about medicine of the Middle Ages, and it was every bit as complete as the medicine of today, in the sense that there were therapies for everything, and so every malady had a way of being explained, just as it does today, and a proper therapy. And people believed in those therapies just as much as we believe in our therapies today. And so it probably means, like, now we think a lot of those therapies and a lot of the ideas about disease in the Middle Ages were primitive and wrong. It probably means some of our thoughts about medicine today are primitive and wrong. But it does, history gives you a kind of perspective that the present moment is not so very special. And the people thinking today are not thinking like so much better thoughts than ever have been thought in the history of the world, you know? That there were quite smart people around in medicine in previous generations, and they were doing important things. And then regenerative medicine brings it sort of full circle, because when you're creating an organ from a newly populated group of stem cells, everything is in question. Like the most basic things that you learned in physiology and like first year medical school and so on, that you thought you'd never have to think about again, are relevant to stem cell generated organ or to other regenerative medicine constructs. So in that sense, the advance of science, because regenerative medicine will allow, for instance, organs to be made available to everybody who needs them, rather than like 10% the way it is today. So the advance of medicine, the advance of science, makes history and what's gone on in the past more relevant, rather than thinking that it's all just a sort of random shot of what's going on today, and it matters little how we got there. How we got there really matters a lot, and there are general lessons in terms of how we might think about how certain are we that these things are correct, that we currently believe in medicine, and how much does it matter if they do change quite a lot in the future.
So, okay, we're there again with the two of them. Have you ever thought of doing something different than medicine?
Well, I suppose that I began thinking of being a writer, but one can be a writer in medicine. And I had kind of heroic fantasies when I was a little kid about leading armies and, leading groups of people in various tumultuous events and so on. But that in the long run didn't make much sense. In fact, I think that by picking medicine and medical science, I thought I had found something where you didn't need to be brave at all, where bravery and courage are just not a thing. And then suddenly I found that was absolutely not the case. In preparation for the International Congress of Nephrology in Jerusalem in '93, they had an open meeting to plan that session, the plenary sessions, and I had proposed a presentation on international disaster relief. And the criticism resounded for years and years that I was like this cowardly guy sitting in my chairman's office at the University of Alberta in northern Canada, and sending all these other people out to do risky things, and I never put myself at risk. And this was not something that had ever occurred to me as like a criticism of my behavior and my status in the world. And so I really took it to heart, and over the next few years, like from 1990 to 1999, I did a lot of risky things, sort of for political reasons, because I had been criticized for, not ever putting myself at risk. And so it was many different kinds of risks, but going to Kosovo right after the NATO bombing in '99, going to Nigeria after the mass poisoning of children there in '91, a lot of things like that. We're sort of putting myself in harm's way on purpose to to improve the politics surrounding my activities in kidney medicine. I learned that being courageous, or seeming courageous at least, were important in this field that I thought I had picked that was quite safe from any big drama. And in fact, like, disaster relief was never an interest of mine originally. It just happened that when I started the Acute Renal Failure Commission of the International Society in 1988, it just happened to be exactly the same time as the Yerevan, Armenia earthquake, where all these crushed people were going into kidney failure, and people were inappropriately sending aid, using a tax write-off by sending birth control pills and vitamins into an area with a lot of crushed people where neither birth control pills nor vitamins are of any value, and planes crashed, and all sorts of stupid things happened, where actually the second man-made disaster of the response to the natural disaster was worse than the original disaster. And there were many lessons in that. And then this whole thing about what psychologically men need, or seem to need, that in the old days they could go on crusades, they could do all this stuff, that was exciting, and that people praised them for, and so on. And now in modern life we go directly from our mothers to our wives, and we don't get to go and fight pirates on the high seas and go to places where we fight crusades and we kill infidels and all this kind of thing. And so when an earthquake happens, suddenly the primitive man inside us thinks, okay, this is my chance, and they need me. Those crushed people need me. And even if they're saying we don't need outside help, these people still go and show up, and they expect to be treated well, to be hosted in the midst of an earthquake. And they get really upset if like people seem distracted by other concerns. And these do-gooder physicians who were not asked for show up because they have this psychological need to do this. And so there were many examples of that, of me providing a kind of long-range psychotherapy to people who had gone to an earthquake zone and were remarkably unhappy because, like, the people in that zone who originally lived there seemed preoccupied, and they weren't into really hosting this, like, first world physician who just shows up and says, here I am, I'm your savior, I'm going to fix everything now, and you don't have to worry about a thing now that I'm here. And, yeah, so there was a lot of that kind of activity, and it was gave very useful lessons about life in general, I think. And I mean, that's kind of what I feel when you ask any regrets. I mean, suppose that every decision you made was with the idea that I'm only going to do this once, this is the time, this is how I'm going to do it. Well, then any defects and any weaknesses in what you do is something that you would always regret because it was only that one time. But if you think of life as something that constantly evolves and you just keep getting better and you're constantly just kind of reworking things, like poets say that, that it's all about revision, it's not what you write as the first draft. So why wouldn't life be like that in general? And so, for instance, the first time I ever moderated consensus, there's this long table, and I'm at the end of it, and I'm running the meeting. And I say one thing, and half the people stiffen, like they can't believe I said something so incredibly stupid as that. Then I say something else, and the other half of the people stiffen. And anyway, gradually I got better at that stuff. And the stiffening of people, and the huge shock that I would say something so incredibly stupid as what I had just said stopped happening. And I regard it as just a natural, I was learning the craft of the somewhat unique thing that I was doing there, and it takes time to learn. So one does not ordinarily regret that sort of personal evolution if you think about it that way. Whereas if you regard everything as just an individual event, then maybe you do regret some of the things that turn out badly. So like you can think about that this whole metaphor of David Crippen and me. So David Crippen in Critical Care Medicine started the email discussion group at the same time when I started the kidney medicine email discussion group. And we're completely opposite people in many ways. And as a part of that metaphor, I started talking also about, so there was a nerd night, a kind of entertainment for a drinking crowd learning about science. Same time it's called Nerd Night. And I spoke about David Crippen and me and how we were polar opposites. We had never met. And then I talked about Hot 107, which is an Edmonton radio station. And actually over the years, there's like a lot of really immersive, interesting video about me talking about Hot 107. Hot 107 does not exist anymore. So they decided they could make more money by being Power 107, and there are a whole bunch of things that happened. So really, you say, well, that was like the most ridiculous analogy because this thing doesn't even exist anymore. But it worked for the while that it worked. And then let's talk about the David Crippen analogy. So when we decided we would actually meet, then I had to confront the idea that what do I think of somebody who really is my polar opposite? Would I like such a person? Would it be palatable to meet somebody who's the exact opposite of me? And it was really challenging. So I went out on a certain day. I was about to pick up these glasses. I had discovered that my optometrist friend, who I had had for years, finally had really interesting glasses frames that he had acquired. And so finally he had glasses of a type that I'd be happy to wear for the next eon. So I went out and picked up these glasses during the day and left one of the students, Ashita Mogi, with looking over the PowerPoint that David Crippen had just sent us. And I got back and I was all excited talking about the glasses, and she looked so pale because that PowerPoint was so incredibly misogynist and wrong, and it was almost not possible for her to complete looking at all the slides. It was so horrible. And so in the long run, we had thought that David Crippen and I would meet publicly and we'd make a big deal of this, and we wound it all down because that didn't make sense. And particularly there was no woman I knew in the world who was eager to meet him after seeing this PowerPoint he had put together, and it just so you would say, well, gee, wasn't that a mistake? Don't you regret that? Well, I learned a lot, And it didn't really end badly. It just was kind of surprising. And to regret winning, like you would say, well, one of the parts of the metaphor was that I was always jealous of him. He had his own rock band. He does all his work life sitting up, and he's striding around the hospital, very physically active. I'm sitting there looking through a microscope, and I don't have my own rock band. I didn't do drugs, and I didn't know the groupies and stuff in the 60s as he did. I missed out on Woodstock. I didn't know about Woodstock until after it occurred, and he was actually there. You know, all those sorts of things. But in the end, the problem with the metaphor, and you can say, well, is it a problem, is that basically I won. It's not such a good story now that I'm not the underdog, because his health deteriorated, even though we're of similar age. And, you know, a lot of things made it look like my life turned out better than his, although at the time that we began, it just seemed like he was this spectacular guy who did all this cool stuff that I had never done, and, you know, and it was kind of a legend at his own time. So I don't really think regret is the right word for like what happened to Hot 107 and what happened with the Kim Solez, David Crippen metaphor. You can still learn from such things, and I don't think you can argue that the metaphors shouldn't have been used in the first place. They just reached a point where it doesn't make sense to keep talking about them, because, you know, life has changed and things have moved on. So.
But okay, you how much do you think that you put of your experience into the fact that you love to teach? Because I think we can say that you love to teach.
Well, I do love to teach, but the other thing that's interesting about that is with all the videos, you can see how clumsy a teacher I was in the beginning. Like when the course began in the fall of 2011, there were two things wrong with it. One was that the presentations weren't anywhere near as good as they are now. And secondly, I did all the talking afterwards, so one main presentation, and the only person saying anything very interesting afterwards was always me. And that was really, really unsatisfactory. And then, over the years, the presentations, including my own, have gotten a lot smoother, more convincing, more broadly appealing, and just better teaching. But secondly, at a certain moment in 2012, the students were giving us better questions, better discussion than I had had in the past, which was just great. And so that has sort of continued, that now there's a kind of intellectual ferment, a back and forth between the young people and me, which was always what I intended. But in the beginning, it wasn't so much me and them, it was just me and me and me and me, which was really unsatisfactory and lame in the beginning. But there was also a kind of halting style and so on. I just wasn't very watchable. And now with green screen videos, like the amount of information we're conveying per minute or per 10 minutes or whatever you want to say is so much greater, because you can fill all the white space around you with these other images and other videos and so on. And it's sort of given a new life to the teaching enterprise. And now we have a whole cadre of students learning how to do green screen videos, and it's also good for them. Whatever they plan to do in their future, it'll be good to know how to do such content-filled videos where in a very short period of time you can convey an immense amount of knowledge in a very animated way. And how do we know that works? Well, it's the way every newscast is done on TV around the world, and every weather report and so on. I mean, people have known in the professional broadcasting world that this is the way to do things. So we finally kind of reached that point. And in fact, I started using the phrase broadcast quality video a long time ago, and I was wrong. It really wasn't broadcast quality because of the absence of green screen components. But now I think it is.
So you told us several things about the past, about the history and about the past. Now, before you go to your meeting, tell us about your dreams.
My dreams, yeah, I guess my dreams are quite specific because things keep happening that add content. Like you might say, well, let's take the Future and All That Jazz. The Future and All That Jazz is the poetic and musical spin-off from the course where you tricked people into learning about something that if they saw a poster promoting a lecture on this subject, there's 0% chance they would ever decide to go listen to the lecture. But by putting the same subject in poetry and music, you can get them to go there. Well, so Mallory Chipman, who's my musical partner in this, she's 23. She has become the acting head of the vocal music department at Grant McEwen, and that gives her certain clout to ask people to do things and so on. And so she has a new band, which just performed this past Tuesday, Mallory Chipman and the Mystics, and a modular synthesizer is like the central feature of that band. Not only kind of conceptually, but even visually. When you look on stage, the synth is the prettiest thing there. It's got these beautiful wires, and you're thinking, what is that? And you're like the idea of a beautiful machine. Who thinks about that? But that's what it really is. And so suddenly the new ideas that I have that we're teaching about in the course, like what Gagan just did on the Fermi paradox and what Sarah is doing with quantum supremacy and so on, those brand new, very important ideas in terms of medical science are very much mirrored in what Mallory's doing with this very much more satisfying music. I mean, she or I could never have found a defect in what she was doing before, but it was just like the videos that I used to do that have all this white space around me where there's nothing going on. Now, if you put action in that white space and have a certain energy there, then it's just 1,000-fold better. And so my definite hope for the future is to keep all those things going in sync. So, and to have connections. For instance, in the course, a student could pick the modular synthesizer and what it does exactly, and then think about that as a metaphor for the future of human life in general. Where people are doing things, the synthesizer captures little bits of it, and then in a very intelligent way makes it better by mixing and matching and so on. And you can see that happen on stage with music, but why couldn't it be the case with lots of other things too? So when machines are smarter than we are, if that works in a way that benefits human beings, and we argue that one of the objects of the course is to kind of massage the future so that it does turn out well for the human race, then that is maybe what will happen. That machines will be able to take human performance and enhance it, mix and match, and do all sorts of things that human beings would never be capable of doing, but starting with this human product, just like what the modular synthesizer does. And you say, well, what does that have to do with medicine? It's very interesting. So the idea of medicine writ large, of course, is contemplating a future. You're saying, what are my future dreams? Where the diseases of today are all gone or easily treatable, and what physicians do in the future is human enhancement, and not just physical, but moral, spiritual, and there'd be no end to the human wish to be enhanced. You can never be enhanced enough, right? However wise or however moral or however physically perfect you were, you would always want more, right? So yeah, anyway, I've lots of surprisingly specific thoughts about what the dreams for the future are. It's not only my own aspirations, but what I think the aspirations of society will be, what they will want to do when we're able to do much more of optimizing what human beings can be than we are able to do today.
So would you define yourself as an optimist?
Yes, I'm an optimist, but I can do the apocalypse part too. I can think of, okay, well that would be great if you can make that happen, but couldn't it go in the opposite direction? And couldn't technology make the lives of human beings much, much worse than they've ever been in the past? Just like agriculture initially made the lives of human beings, the average human being, worse. Because when we were hunter-gatherers, we were sort of in charge of our own destiny and that sort of thing. And when agriculture came in, then the lowly people tilling the land were actually in a much worse position than they had been as hunter-gatherers. So that's interesting to think of. Is it possible that things could go really badly wrong, and that although the technology had the potential to create a utopia, it never did, and instead things went from bad to worse? Well, I think one can prevent that, and talking about it, sort of, playing those scenarios through is one way to help ensure that the apocalypse doesn't happen.
Okay, now the apocalypse may happen again. And let me just ask you one last question. How would you like to be remembered by the future generations?
Well, see, that's also, I suppose for most people, that's a hard question. But it's been made easier by several things. My boss, Michael Mengel, came into the cyber nephrology office one day recently and looked at all the cardboard cutouts we have of the royal couple and Sheldon from Big Bang Theory and Iron Man and so on. And he said, Kim, we need a cardboard cutout of you. So anyway, so now we have that. We have two of them. I did a children's poetry contest in a Edmonton suburb, Leduc. Who knew? But like the children in Leduc get together and compete in poetry, and their parents, they're mainly people of color, and they came together in this show home to do this children's poetry contest, and I was the judge. And so I announced that my boss wanted these cardboard cutouts of me, and so they all competed to take pictures that would be suitable for the cardboard cutout. And so we have two of them, and it's possible that we'll have a third, but at least, I mean, that's kind of unique, and it's something you could never justify doing unless your boss told you to do it. And so it's not the only way in which I will be remembered, but it's kind of cute to think that if I did die one night and was not able to make my way into cyber nephrology, you can still open the door and see two of me there in two different poses. So I'm kind of there. Then there is the question that when students claim that there's something unique to be learned from me that goes way beyond medicine, what is it exactly? And so there is a student, much younger than Sarah and Ashita, actually. So Jesse Lee, he worked with me for a summer. He said he was 16, but he was actually 15. He didn't think I would take him if he told me he was 15. But anyway, he was 15. And so now he's applying to go to Harvard, and he's explaining to me what he wants me to write in the letter that I write supporting his Harvard application. And he says, well, I've covered all the bases, so you don't need to cover any of that basic stuff. What I want Harvard University to understand is I want to be as surprising as you are. And I want them somehow to realize how surprising that is, which is very surprising, that everything one would assume about an academic, you're the complete opposite of, and you're so easy to talk to, and there doesn't seem to be any distance between us when I, as a 15, 16-year-old, talk to you and so on. And so he's saying, that's what I want. I want you to convey that essence of how surprising you are. He says, cybernephrology is like a Dr. Seuss book exploded in a room in a hospital. And I want them to understand that. And I think you can somehow do, and that's all I need from you, to have them understand I'm aspiring to be as surprising and to be the kind of experience that you are. Now, how else does that experience manifest itself? Sometimes it manifests itself in very long phone calls, like 4 to 6 hours, and in the idea that I'm just much more interesting to talk to than the young men in a young woman's life. And like, when that has been proposed, it's obviously very flattering. It's a real downer for the guys to hear that. But the one thing you can say is that 4 to 6 hour phone calls are unusual, period. And what it means is there's no inhibitory factors. That the person that I'm talking with and I are both enjoying it. We're reinforcing each other, and so that's something else that happens. I realized, I mean, getting ready for this trip, getting ready to go to the airport, Jesse Lee was Skyping with me. I said, Jesse, I've got to go. And I realized he is somebody that I could have like a 4 to 6 hour conversation with if I wished to, that he wouldn't get tired of it. And yeah, so anyway, that's kind of also something that I do sometimes consider.
Beautiful. Great. Right. Let me mount this interview.
Yes. Yeah.
And yes, and I think we will have a lot of fun watching it.
Yeah, good. Well,
I'll mount it at the latest for Dubai.
What?
No, Dubai, Abu Dhabi.
Right.
But maybe before.
Oh, to have it before would be great. Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah. But I realize that part of your creativity here involves freedom for you to determine the time frame, right? If you ever lost that freedom where there was somebody else telling you when you had to get each video done, I don't think it would actually work.
Well, it's not just that. It's that I work with my friend who is in Italy.
Yeah.
And so I see him when I go back, not all the time. Sometimes he has other things to do.
Right.
Sometimes we do other things together. So let's say that there is not just a question of my freedom, is a question, it's a teamwork.
Yeah, no, I totally
and
understand.
We work better when it's not, also because the only cases in which we work fast is when someone dies. So I would not appreciate you doing that, and I think you would not appreciate you doing
no.
that.
I don't think that isn't likely. Yeah. No, in fact, that's another thing that I realize how extremely lucky I am in terms of my health. And some of the reasons for it are so stupid and embarrassing. So let's talk about sunglasses. So the same young woman who said that I was much more interesting to talk to than any young man she knew, and that's why the phone calls were so long, she also had the opinion that wearing sunglasses, even when it wasn't sunny, was like a really cool fashion thing. So because she was so convinced about this, I also was. And it was at a time that people did not know that ultraviolet light causes cataracts or makes cataracts worse. And so I didn't do it for that reason at all, but I wore sunglasses much more than like any of my colleagues for that stupid vanity reason. But now I am the only person in my extended family who does not have cataracts. My wife has them. Everybody. I mean, both my parents had them. Everybody. And so, and the reason I don't have them, I would like to say it's because I knew all along that I can protect my eye. That's not it. I just thought I looked cooler with sunglasses. When we went out in the evening and I would be wearing sunglasses and we're at the opera, my wife would turn to me and says, "You have no idea how stupid that looks." It was indeed protecting my eyes, And so there are other things like that I think in also involve. My life has been very free of stress. And I think that's bound to be good for one's health. And I never set out to make it that way, but it just is. That there are not a lot of things that I lie awake worrying about. And a lot of things I feel much more on top of. Like somebody else comes in and complains about something, I realize I'm able to be really empathetic with them, because I understand it's a problem for them, but in my life that's just not a problem at all, And I can see that they think of it as a much bigger thing than I do, and it's just So there is. I feel a little bit guilty that my good health is not because of some strategy that I didn't like decide to be healthy, and no, it's just stupid things, stupid accidental things that led to this. Yeah.
But, well, I think Jim will